Well, hello, Stephanie. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, so I just loved your bio, and I'm so glad we had a chance to connect. You've just been really, been following you on Instagram, so you've been a little inspiration to me. But I always like to start my interviews with just an origin story, having you go back to share with us what got you into travel. What is your earliest memory, maybe? What sparked this passion that you have as this world traveler, as we will find out soon.
Well, I actually didn't grow up traveling. I grew up in the Northeast, and my family went to Florida twice a year for vacation. And the only part of the world I saw was the parts in Epcot when it opened. I went to Epcot the year it opened. And, my mom used to joke because when we went to Disney World, Small World was always my favorite ride, and my sisters
Yes.
hated it. And they would let me ride it by myself, and I would just ride it in circles as a kid. And she's like, I should have known you were going to wind up the way that you did. But I didn't travel. It just never seemed really accessible to me. And my grandparents traveled, so that's some of my earliest memories of like being aware of travel.
Mm.
My grandparents are Italian, and we
Ah.
would go back and visit family members, and we'd sit in their basement and watch slideshows.
Oh, God.
But there was never any part of me that felt like, oh, I really want to go here, or like I could do this. And then I remember in sixth grade, I had this social studies teacher who was a world traveler, and
Mm.
he used to show us slideshows in school of the places he went. And I think my very first memory of me wanting to go somewhere was when he showed us pictures of his trip to Egypt, of the pyramids in Egypt.
Wow.
And um, I was like, oh yeah, that would be cool. That would be cool. But it never even like there was no spark like I could do that. And fast forward, I studied French very poorly in high school, and I used to think there was a picture of Mont Saint Michel on the front of my French book. And I was like, if I could go to Paris before I die, like that's my dream. Like maybe I'll go to Paris on a honeymoon or something. And yeah, so I kind of had that like Paris before I die. And um
You're not alone.
exactly. And so I was like, yeah, okay. And went ahead, went to college, and my freshman year in college, I became friends with a another person in my French class actually, and she had kind of grown up with traveling parents, and she
Mm.
like pushed me and was like, you should like do this study abroad trip. You should do this study abroad trip. And I was like, yeah, well, whatever. Anyway, I got a scholarship to do the study abroad trip.
Oh,
And I went to London, January 26th, 1993 was the date of my first passport stamp. And there was something about that trip where I was like your life is not the same. And I think to me, it wasn't that like I discovered I had a wonder for travel. I think for me, that trip was like, it's accessible to you. Like, it's not far. Like, it wasn't hard to do this.
hmm.
And I mean, we traveled every spare chance we got during that trip. We Euroled across Europe, and we went back the next January. That was actually my first points and miles trip was that next January we went back. And I just haven't stopped since.
Since,
So
yeah.
what, it's been 31 years, and I just
Wow.
keep
I
adding on,
know.
keep adding on. And I haven't lost any of the wonder,
That's
believe it or not.
amazing. I just, yeah, a similar story. I grew up in East Coast, same thing. Florida was
Mhm.
pretty much, or Virginia, sometimes Virginia Beach,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, it's similar. And it sounds about the same time I got my first stamp. I think it was
Hmm.
91 though. And so I've had that passion probably since, but I love your story. And I hear a lot of folks that, they didn't necessarily start with any kind of travel experience. And then suddenly this world opened up, as you said,
Hmm.
like finding out that it is accessible and it is accessible. And you just have to, be creative sometimes, maybe in finding that way to get
Hmm.
to where you want. So love that. And you, like you said, you have not stopped.
Nope.
Um, so you have 153 countries under
Uh-huh.
your belt, which is so impressive. I'm like, so many people, they they had this goal to like see all the countries in
Hmm.
the UN recognizes before they die, and you are
Hmm.
really close,
Exactly.
right?
I've been to Paris a lot of times.
You've been what?
I had a repeat, so I've been to Paris a lot of
Oh
times.
yeah. So I'm sure you've been to
Yeah,
other,
yeah.
countries more than once. So that's
Absolutely.
amazing. And out of those countries, I'm not going to ask you what your favorite is, but I always like to hear which one surprised you the most.
Oh gosh. So many have surprised me. Um, I just one that just comes to my mind. I recently went to El Salvador and I loved it. I was like, this is Central America's best kept secret.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, obviously El Salvador hasn't been safe for much of our lifetimes to travel to, but I love the places that are still rugged. Like
Yeah.
I loved traveling back in the day when you had like a book and
Hmm.
you had no idea where you were going and you just got
Yeah.
lost and whatever you found was what you saw.
Yeah.
Um, El Salvador was a little bit like that. There's some areas where there's some infrastructure,
Mm.
but because it hasn't really been touristed like Guatemala and Honduras, um, it's like it feels still like that magical, like you're actually exploring um just the way people live versus
Yes.
like you're
Yes.
exploring this, but there's lots of handicraft shops that are there for tourists at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I really loved it. It was kind of
Yes.
a magical place, and you could find yourself just at places where there was no people.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm so thrilled that it's becoming a more safe place.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I've actually been to El
Oh,
Salvador.
uh-huh.
Wait, but back in the 90s. So when
Oh
it
yeah.
was not like you said, the
Yeah.
infrastructure was not there, but we lived among the locals, which
Oh yeah.
I do
Hmm.
love that when I go to visit a place. So,
Hmm.
there was no touristy anything about it. So
Well,
like
it's
you said,
still like that.
yeah. So I love that. Excellent. Um, I want to know how has since you've started traveling, so we were probably in your 20s maybe, right? When you started
And
traveling, roughly
19,
19.
19,
Okay, 19.
19 or 19.
And I
Yeah.
won't say how old you are now, but I obviously the way that you
This
travel,
is an over 50 podcast, right?
it
So
is. Yes, yes. So of course, yes.
I
So
make the cut.
you make the cut. Okay. From that, early years of traveling to how you travel now, how has that
Mhm.
changed?
I feel like it's always changing, right? Like you change as a person.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about how much has changed since 1993.
Yes.
Like I used to have to, I joke with my niece in 1994, I went to China and my niece
Oh,
was born
wow.
when I was in China. And I had no idea she was born because you had to go to the post office and make a collect call was the only way you could communicate with people. So like it's so different. Like technology has changed
Hmm.
so much stuff. And I think technology almost in a way has made you have to be a little more planned, especially if you're going to busier places, because there's like people book things in advance, whereas you
Yeah.
couldn't do that before. You got off the train and, looked for a place to stay. And
Exactly.
so I would say there's that bit, like just the way
Mhm.
technology has changed. Um, I feel like the number of travelers has really increased. Um, in just recent years, I feel like travel has become a lot more accessible. Um, and for me, like when I first started traveling, I did do a lot of like backpacking, super on a budget. I had
Yeah.
zero money. We would eat rice because if you ate rice, then you could spend like, well, I was a student, so we had like a food allowance.
Yeah.
And if you spent all your food allowance on rice, then you could use your food allowance to travel on the weekend. So
Yes.
just going from a place from having, you know, scraping by to get places. Um, and then I also do humanitarian work. Um, and for me, like so I've done like budget, super budget backpacking. I've done like expat living. I lived in Thailand and Cambodia. I lived in Sudan. I lived on a ship in West Africa. So I lived in lots of different places, kind of as more of an expat, and still
Mhm.
traveled from those different places. But that's like a whole different type of travel, like really kind of being immersed in a place
Yes.
for a longer period of time.
Yes.
Um, and then, I do a lot of work in teaching people points and miles as a way to make travel accessible to them. And so I've done the whole gamut of, luxury travel, flying on the Emirates 380 and taking a shower and doing all that
Oh,
crazy
wow.
stuff too. And so I've really gotten to experience everything from like the grubby backpackery, eating bread to taking a shower in the sky, everything in between, very short stays, very long stays. And I like doing it all. And during COVID, I actually met my partner, and he has two kids. So I've spent most.
Hang on, we had a little technical snag. Are you still there?
All of the travel.
I'm sorry, I had a little, my internet was unstable. Uh,
Oh,
we go back to that little end of that last part. You start with your partner, because I think
okay.
that's where it started. Yeah.
So I met my partner during COVID, and up until then, I had almost always been a solo traveler or had traveled with, friends here and there, and have done a tiny bit of group travel, not that much. But since I met him, I've also been able to, I do still solo travel actually quite a lot, but have been able to do trips with him and trips with the two girls as well. So have been able to like experience like the joys and the highs and lows
Right.
of family travel as
Right.
well. Um, you know, Traveling with a partner too. So that's kind of
Yeah.
been my evolution too.
So you have experienced, like you said, from all the gamuts of
Mhm.
budget to luxury and solo, family, a couple. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I also feel like what you're willing to put up with when you're 18 to travel might not be what you're willing to put up with when you're 51 to travel.
I agree
I'll
with
still
that.
do long. I just did some crazy long haul overnight flights on the last trip I took, and I was like, it is not as easy for me to do a 15 and a half hour, flight in economy and get off the plane and go sightseeing the next day.
Yes. Yeah. I felt the same way. For some reason, when I came back from my trip this past fall, I had three planes, long layovers, and literally it was 24 hours of
Uh-huh.
travel. And after I got off the plane and I landed back in the US, I was like, yeah, I don't think I can do that again
Uh-huh.
anymore. I'm just like too old for that. Maybe one layover is fine,
Uh-huh.
but this is too much. Yeah.
I pray harder for the upgrades now, and I sleep on less airport floors.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. You have an amazing mission statement. First of all, I love that you have a mission statement, but I also love the middle part of it. So I'm just going to say your mission statement is see the world, change the world, have fun doing it. So I want to talk about the change the world part because I actually feel like timing of, talking with you is perfect because when I came back from my the Camino trip I just did this fall, I felt just this longing to have some of my travel be more purposeful in
Mhm.
that it would have a more positive impact of wherever I'm going, right? So just kind of feeling that nudge to really investigate that some more for my own self.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to first of all, how did your statement come about? And then I want to talk about that middle
Mhm.
statement and, how you are actually living that out.
Mhm. Well, my mission statement came about just out of my own confusion because I feel like in modern times it is very normal that people have like side hustles and, you might like be a traveler and a banker and different
Yeah.
things. But
Yeah.
I would say like a decade ago, when people asked like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I work for a humanitarian organization and I started a hammock company and I teach people how to use points and miles and I write for credit card websites. I was like, which one of them? They're like, huh? And so I was like a little bit like, and I was working on, oh, and everybody was a blogger too.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was working on creating my website and I was just like, how do I tell one story about what I do?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and so I thought like what drives me to do the things that I do? What is my umbrella?
Yeah.
And because like being a person who like writes about credit cards and being a person who like lives in Africa and like helps people understand poverty and war, like they aren't normally like the same grouped in the same category. And I was like, you know what? The reason I like to write about credit cards is because I think it's a way that makes what I get to do and see accessible to other people. So if I can help make the world accessible to people, that is going to help people broaden their worldview much more than anything I can like tell somebody that they should think. And so that was just kind of my umbrella of like all the different things that I do kind of fall under this see the world, change the world, have fun doing it.
Yeah.
So, and I was like, and when I think about things that I want to do, I'm always like, do they kind of fall into that, And is that part of who I am? So that's where it came about. And it's just something that's really stuck with me and has resonated. I think I wrote that like 20 years ago now. And so it's just something that has resonated and kind of continued to guide me.
I think it's important that people have their own personal mission statement, even if it doesn't relate to work, because
Mhm,
like you said, it then helps you filter through, things that might not fall under that.
mhm,
Should I do that? Well, it doesn't really
mhm.
encapsulate this part of my
Yeah,
mission. So,
yeah. And
having that, yeah,
I was just gonna say, I've been very lucky that I have been able to kind of build a life and a career that kind of just go together.
mm,
Um, and it's not necessarily the way everyone does it, and it's not the way everyone wants to do it or should do it. And but yeah, but I think even I just want to encourage people who have a very different life. I know I listen to podcasts and I'm like, I'm doing it all wrong,
uh,
but I just want to encourage people who have my life is not normal, who have like a normal life that there are lots of people who still travel who live a very mission who do live a very missional way and have a 9 to 5 job or a,
yeah.
a more typical job.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. And with remote work,
Mm-hmm.
anymore, it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
easy at this
Mm-hmm.
point.
That's
Yeah.
very true.
So let's talk about apparently so the change the world part, I would imagine the color cloud hammocks was part of that, maybe that inspiration. Tell us about the color cloud hammocks.
Color Cloud Hammocks is a women-owned fair trade hammock company that I started with two of my friends. I started it while I was living in Ethiopia. The inspiration for it actually came about in Washington, D.C. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years.
Okay.
And I had I owned a really fun, colorful hammock that I had bought when I was in Africa somewhere. And I loved this travel hammock. I took it everywhere. And um, I moved to DC after living in Sudan, and it wasn't the easiest place for me to live. People talk about like reverse culture shock and
Hmm.
re-entry. And
Oh yeah.
I literally was living in Darfur. I went from one of the most difficult places of the world to one of the most prosperous places of the world. And I will say, DC's also changed a lot in the last 20 years, but when I moved from Sudan to DC, I was like, Sudan is was one of the worst places, and the people were so happy and so kind.
Hmm.
And I moved to DC, and literally no one looked up from their Blackberries. Blackberries, that's when it was.
Yeah, back then.
And I was just like, I was just kind of dumbfounded when I was there, and I really just struggled. And I lived on Capitol Hill in a little row house, and on our corner we had a tree in our front porch, and I would hang my hammock
Oh.
between our front porch and our tree, and I would sit in my hammock, and people would come around the corner or walk down the street, and they'd like look up from their BlackBerry, and they would talk to me, and I was like, hammocks are magic. Are
Oh.
magic. And I was like, we need to sell hammocks in Washington, DC. Hammocks make people happy. And
Yeah.
so my friends and I, my two roommates I was living with at the time, we like bought a sewing machine, and we like figured out how to buy ripstop nylon, and we sewed our own first hammock. It took us about 4 days, and we were like, this is really cool. But you know what? There is no business plan here because we'd have to sell these for like $7,000 a piece to ever make any money. Like it took us so long to do it. So we were like,
Mm.
that was a fun idea, and kind
Yeah.
of like, package it up, set it aside.
Yeah.
And then I moved, I was working for a humanitarian organization and moved from DC to Cambodia. And I'd been living in
Mm.
Cambodia just a few, I don't know, probably a few weeks, month or so. And I met some women who had started their own seamstress shop. And I
Oh.
just I don't even, and I was walking through the market looking for linen to make pants or something, and I found nylon, and I was like, I found a way I can make hammocks. And so I did. I bought nylon in the market, and I took it to these women who had just started their own little shop, and drew pictures of what I wanted. And that's honestly like it just started really small, and it still is small. Um, but, and it was like in the very early days of Facebook, we launched the whole thing over Facebook.
Okay.
And um yeah, and it's just kind of gone over time, and my friends were still back here in the States, and I would ship the hammocks and they would sell them. And that's kind of how we started.
Okay.
And so we were able to support those women who had started their own little shop, and pay them a fair wage to make
Yeah.
the and then, so we did that for quite a while. Eventually, I left Cambodia. We still did it from Cambodia for a while. And then one of my business partners moved to Ethiopia. And um, she and her husband started a company that does investing in businesses in Africa.
Okay.
Is another super interesting, but they actually wound up investing in this family-owned uh, sewing company.
Oh
And
gosh.
so, we actually were able to um, get fabric made. Because
Oh.
one of the problems that we had in Ethiopia and Cambodia was you only got whatever was in the market.
Hmm.
And like a company like Cotopaxi that makes everything in whatever random colors, and random colors is part of their market, right? But when we were selling to like the University of Minnesota, and they wanted hammocks
Yeah.
in red and yellow,
Right.
well, they would put in an order for 30 hammocks, and we'd be like, sorry, there's no red in the market today. So it became
Mm.
a challenge, and so we were looking to kind of like shift so we could be and do a little more retail. And we found a way that we could do it in Ethiopia. And then one of the partners was based in Ethiopia. So then they were made in Ethiopia by women, but we could do them in more quantity and control the colors. So
Oh, wonderful. So
yeah,
it just continued, just a different country, and yeah, that's amazing. Are there some other, you said you were involved with a lot of humanitarian,
yeah.
what's some other
So
ones that you've done?
Well, so for a long time, I mean, professionally, I've worked kind of for NGOs for most of my career. I currently, in 2013 is when I left Cambodia full time and moved to Oregon, which is where I'm based now. And in 2013, I went out on my own as a consultant. So I
Okay.
work for different humanitarian organizations now. Um, and my background is in kind of communications, and I like to do technical communications and kind of program communications. So like explaining things to normal people, like water and sanitation projects. And I just did a big project on child marriage. Um, so
Mm.
different kind of just like different issues, but not from a marketing perspective where I'm telling you like a sad story so you give me money. From a perspective of like, um, how are we explaining the issue to people so they understand it and understand it in a way that um, they can kind of know what the challenges are and what some of the good practices are and what some of the goals are, without being a super nerdy technical expert in that area. So, but before I started consulting, I worked full time
Okay.
in the humanitarian world. In Cambodia, I worked as a regional communications manager for World Vision, which is a child-focused organization.
Yes. Hmm.
And we covered 16 different countries, and we worked with so in each country, we had local communications people,
Yes.
and they're the ones who were gathering the stories, going out in the
Mhm.
communities. Um, but I had some really interesting experiences getting to work with them, coming up with like strategies for their country, helping do um, training and capacity building on like how to tell different stories, what kind of stories were interesting to people.
Yeah.
Um, did like it was in the very I mean, I helped so many countries like learn how to use social media and start to use social media because that was the era that I was there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
so lots of different things. We did a lot of like emergency communications training. In Asia, there's all kinds of cyclones and things that you never hear about, typhoons and cyclones. And
Right.
so making sure those offices were equipped in like how to communicate when those different kinds of crises occurred. Um, that they were prepared, like if CNN was there, like how to do a media interview for international media, you know, the whole
Yeah.
the whole gamut. So I loved it. Honestly, it was one of my favorite jobs I've ever done. But I also feel like there's like a lifespan for everything. And
Yes.
one of the big goals of some of those jobs too is like if you're there in like the role of an expat because you have a skill set that someone else doesn't have, to like to bring it to a place where you've imparted that skill set to another person who already lives there
Yes.
and they can do that work too.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you
But
know,
that's so rewarding in being
yeah.
able to pass that on and use your skills that
Mhm.
you've acquired, to use it sort of in that travel industry, humanitarian industry. You kind of like put it together. I love that. I love when people are able to do that,
I,
use like some skills that they've gotten,
mhm.
like you said, from a normal job.
Yeah,
Right.
I worked in a high-tech PR firm was my first job, and it didn't
Okay.
bring
So,
me any joy or fulfillment. But
yeah. So you're using all these skills and, keeping it, involved with your travel is so exciting for me as I would love to be able to sort of be able to
yeah,
do that, with some
yeah.
skills that I have.
I will say, so just another thing is like, that's it's not something that everyone's able to do. Like the world needs lots of people to not work in the humanitarian industry because there's many other industries. But I will say, like, I think it's just as important to be a good traveler when you travel. You
Yeah,
know,
let's talk
um,
about that. Yes.
just treat a place like you would treat your own home, or you would treat better than your own home, and leave places, in any way you can, like better than you found them. And
Yes.
for me, one of the things I try to remind myself is like, you know, like I get a good kick out of bargaining. Like I just find it fun. And, I have lots of bargaining experience because I had a bargain to buy tomatoes when I lived in Cambodia, and I'd get really mad if they were charging me more than they were supposed to. Um, but also just like remembering like that when you're buying things in different countries, like like pay a fair price. Like it's fun to get a deal, but like so many of the people who are selling things in markets are living like hand to mouth.
Yes.
Like you don't want to get ripped off. I'm not saying like get ripped off, pay them too much or, but like just like educate yourself, like learn
Hmm.
about like as much as you can. It's hard, but
Yeah.
like learn what's a fair price. Make sure when you walk away from something that the person who's selling it to you also feels good um about the transaction, be respectful, like take care of places.
Yes.
And I mean, it seems silly to say that, but you know, like I like walk around and I'm like, oh, like I feel like we as travelers are just completely clueless because we're operating in our own little world. So just like being aware.
Yes. No, I love that. And thinking, obviously buying local and, trying to support the local economy versus maybe going
Hmm.
to a big grocery store or something that might be in
Hmm.
the area. Go to the markets, go to the
Yeah.
farmers markets and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I love that advice. Yeah, I'm a true believer of that too. Just really being mindful of the, where I'm traveling and how I'm, leaving, if I'm leaving anything behind, making sure it's,
Hmm.
positive, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. Just, and I think that leaves you as a traveler too feeling fulfilled I mean, I personally would feel that, that you're not just invasive, like you're not just invading this country and I think that's when a lot of locals kind of get a sour taste for, when tourists come into certain countries that, we're demanding or, we're just rude or whatever, whatever it might be, right? So
Yeah.
I'm trying to be mindful of that when I travel as well. So yeah,
And
love
I'd say
that.
one other thing I would say is I think one of the places people immediately jump to when they think about like doing kind of humanitarian things when they travel is like, oh, can I volunteer somewhere? Can I volunteer somewhere? And it's it's not it's a little bit of a tricky one too.
Mm,
And I would say if that's something that you're interested in doing, um, take time and do some research
yes.
and ask the local organizations about it.
Yes.
And, like when I lived in Cambodia, I know there was like one of the organizations there was like kind of doing like a anti-voluntourism campaign because there was really negative stuff going on and like they would like people would come into town and they'd feel bad because there were so many street kids and they'd want to go volunteer at these local orphanages where there were these options to volunteer. But
Okay.
what the average tourist who's coming and is going to be there for a couple days and wants to do something didn't know in Cambodia was a lot of these kids in these orphanages aren't orphans. And they're just like, it's like a money-making operation, and parents are putting their kids uh, in these
Yeah.
places to
Hmm.
as a way to kind of generate it's like a tourism industry and you come one
Wow.
day and you teach them the alphabet and then you move on to you move on to Bangkok and then the next tourist come one day and they have some white person who comes in and teaches them the alphabet and so just I would say do some research to find out kind of like if there's anything dubious in that area. There used to be some good resources around it, and I can maybe look for them afterwards.
Okay.
You can.
Yeah. No, I think I agree. It's important to do your research and make sure um, I mean, I would say work with a reputable company that
Yeah.
actually kind of organizes those kind of things
Mhm.
so that
Mhm.
you're not, because
Yeah.
if you do it by yourself, you have there's that chance you're going to be getting scammed, as we call it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want you to have that kind of opportunity, that's that sort of
Mhm.
experience. So I agree. So yeah, if you have some resources, I would love to, maybe include those in the show notes. I know a few, but I'd be curious to know what you're recommending, as well. So that'd be great. Um, well, what would you what advice would you give to a woman solo traveler going out maybe for her first solo trip?
Um, I would say if it was a first solo trip, I actually gave this advice to someone yesterday because someone
Okay,
was
good.
talking about it. Um, I would say do a practice trip. That's what I always tell people. You know, if you are, you're thinking about going on a trip, and I mean, it could be that you're very experienced doing solo trips at home and this is your first international trip.
Mm,
It could be that you've done a lot of international travel, but you've never gone solo. It could be that
hmm.
you've never traveled before at all, but you really like this is the bucket list thing for
Yeah.
2025 for you. So recognize that everybody starts in a different place.
Mm,
And so blanket advice, might not be the best thing for you. So remember, you're starting where you're starting. And I would say, you know, do something that stretches you to the a next step. Like if you've never been anywhere, I would not recommend, taking a solo trip to Saudi, you know. But if you have traveled a ton internationally in group trips and this is just your first trip and you're already like comfortable navigating international airports and taxis and that kind of stuff, then yeah, you'll stretch yourself, but that might be this, going solo from already international
yeah.
traveling isn't a giant step. If you've never really done a big trip solo, maybe like take a smaller step before you like take your next step. Like, have you ever done a solo trip in the US, in your own state, Like, are you
Right.
worried? Like, think about what are the things you're worried about. If you're worried about like what am I going to do like if I have to like eat by myself in a restaurant, or people worry about different things. Like, are you
Yes.
worried about being lonely? Like, do a week-long trip, just like a week-long road trip, or a couple days, like fly somewhere else in the US and do a trip, and just like kind of address that thing you're scared of,
Yes.
or the thing you think you're worried about, before you level it up.
Yeah.
And, if you're doing if it's like a first international trip, you know, then maybe start somewhere that you have some affinity towards, or, like you speak the language, like going to the person who I was talking to yesterday, they want to do their first trip to Ireland. And I was like, that's great. And she was like, well,
Yes.
I'm worried that, I've never traveled international solo before. And I'm like, you're a great solo traveler. You drove across the country twice this year. Like, you're not going to be scared in Ireland.
She
And
will be fine. Yes.
exactly. And
Yes.
so start with a trip that is already going to be a great trip, right? So
Yeah.
the like lessen the challenges, and take the right size step for you.
I like how you put that we're all starting at a different place. That's very
Yeah.
true. Like you said, there's different levels of what your experience in travel in general has been, right? To start with. And then, where you've been, like you said, is it local? Is it your first international? I love it. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Don't listen to the negativity of
Mm,
people are who want to like put their own fears on you.
amen to that.
Like,
Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, it's true. Like, and being nervous is the right feeling. Like, you don't get nervous if you're doing something that you've done before. You get nervous when you're doing something a little bit new. But I will say, like, even when I went on my trip to El Salvador and I just went on a trip to Timor-Leste, people are like, people who know me, who know I've been to 153 countries, are like, are you sure? Like, isn't that really unsafe? And then I go to sleep at night and my brain's like, am I going to die? Should I not be going on this trip? Am I dumb? And I'm like, I know it. So, and I'm like, no, you've done your research. It's a
Yes.
safe place. And you know, you have to take chances, and you're always going to be nervous doing super exciting, amazing things. So be prepared to be nervous, but don't let anyone project their fears on you.
Yes. Thank you. I love that. And they say nervousness and excitement are actually built from the same, feeling and emotion, so, you might feel nervous, but there's an excitement in there too.
Exactly.
Right. So where are you off to next?
Um,
Anywhere special or any new
well,
place?
I did 14 flights in November. I'm so
Oh
tired.
my goodness.
And then I hosted my family for Thanksgiving. So well, today actually that we're recording this is Travel Tuesday. Um,
Yes,
so I do
exactly.
have a list of flights that I'm going to check out today. I have a lot of things these are my on the wall. These are my trips I'm planning for the year. My niece is getting married, so I actually have quite a few trips that are related to that. So a lot of US based trips. But for my next international trip, I haven't exactly figured it out yet. Um, Trips get a little bit harder once you've done 153 countries and you're trying to do new ones.
Yeah.
I have about 40 left for
Yeah.
the US
Yeah.
goal.
Uh-huh.
And I try to do 5 to 6 a year. I'm not trying to do like everything
Okay.
as fast as I can. My dream is to do it before I die. And hopefully, if I need to do it while I finish while I'm 90, one of my nieces who are both travelers will take me. Um, but I think I would really like this year, I would really love to go to Dominica. It's my only country left in the Caribbean. I have not
Oh,
been to Guyana or Suriname, so those are two that are high on
okay.
my list. Um, there's some really hard ones that I'd love to go to Venezuela, to Angel Falls.
Mm,
Not a super easy one. Um, it will also be interesting to see, just how things change in
correct.
the
Yeah. Because right now Venezuela is not safe.
exactly, and
Yeah.
to see how that changes, and also just to see how things,
Yep.
shake out internationally over the next month with the change in the administration and stuff. I have a friend who wants to go to Saudi with me, and so that is high on my list. I haven't been to Peru or Ecuador, which are two pretty easy ones.
Oh,
So I'm
well,
saving those for when I need them.
Peru was amazing. And actually, it is, I just did an episode, so
Uh-huh.
it's becoming a trend
Uh-huh.
in 2025 to go to Peru
Interesting.
because supposedly I didn't realize this, but uh, the movie Paddington was filmed there.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So people
I'm a big
are
Paddington fan.
right, are being inspired
Uh-huh.
by this movie,
Yeah,
like to go to Peru. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, well,
yeah.
yeah,
That's really funny.
that
That's
is
really
funny, right?
I do a project for UNICEF UK, and Paddington is their spokesperson.
Oh, okay.
In fact, we have a Paddington instead of an angel on the top of our Christmas tree. So,
Okay, well, I hate to say this, but I think that needs to be your next place.
so I feel like that one might need to be a family trip though.
Okay, okay.
Since
Yeah.
I've shared the Paddington love with this crew.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
But yeah,
awesome.
that's really interesting. Yeah, I think it comes out here January 8th. I really am a Paddington nerd.
Okay, well, see, there you go. Where can people find you? Do you have a presence on social media where they can follow you?
Um, I'm easiest to find on Instagram,
Okay.
and it's at Wandering Zito, Z like zipper, ITO. And I also have a website, wanderingforgood.com.
Okay.
And um, I the hammock store is still open, colorcloudhammocks.com.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
And yeah, those are my main places.
Okay. All right. I think you have a few blogs up there a little bit
Yeah,
from your
there's a
old
few there.
there.
I had to
Okay.
rebuild it after COVID, so
Yeah.
like
Well,
it's growing and changing a little bit.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been amazing. I just love this. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your expertise, and even just the whole heart of how you travel. I think I love that, and it's come through in our conversation here. I've enjoyed it.
Okay.
Stephanie, thank you for your time.
Lovely to
It's
talk to
been
you too.
yes, and I'm sure we will. I'm hoping we cross paths, honestly.
Oh, definitely,
Yes,
definitely.
I would love that. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye bye.